Hello and welcome to the Y Media 2022 provincial election debate for Brampton Centre. It's always a pleasure to host the candidates in this election cycle, as we want to make sure on June 2nd you're well informed to make the decision on who is going to form the next government for the next 4 years and have a new premier. And today we have candidate in studio here at Y Media. I'm your host, Ramona Singh, and I want to introduce the CEO and group editor of Y Media, Jadoo Jaswal. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Ramona ji. And as you just mentioned, Y Media certainly takes pride in holding the debates like every elections we do. And it's a very integral part of the democratic process that we offer. And just for full disclosure purposes, I'd like to tell all our viewers that we did invite all the candidates from different provincial parties, the Liberal Party candidate, PC candidate and the Greens. They couldn't show up today. I think the Liberal Party, they did confirm, but I think at the last minute they are saying that due to health reasons, the Liberal candidate cannot participate. But certainly we have the NDP candidate and you would be introducing her.
Yes, absolutely. We have Sarah Singh from the NDP who's seeking re-election. We want to introduce her and welcome her to Y Media. How are you today, Sarah?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me here today for this important discussion.
Absolutely. Please take it away. You have 2 minutes for your introduction.
Well, thank you so much, Ramona, and thank you so much, Yudhavir, and to our viewers at home, thank you so much. My name is Sarah Singh, and I'm your NDP candidate in the riding of Brampton Centre. I do also serve as the deputy leader of Ontario's NDP party. And, you know, I want to just start off by acknowledging that today we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederation, and the Huron-Wendat people. And I think as settlers to this land, it is very important that we acknowledge the lands that we are on, but also take into consideration the 7 grandfather teachings, which remind us that we need to think not only of our current generation, but the impact we're going to have for 7 generations to come. And I share that and I ground myself in that because, you know, my parents were immigrants to this country. My grandparents, they bought their first home right here in Brampton in the H section. My mom's parents are from Guyana and, you know, they settled here and my mom went to high school here as well. My dad immigrated during his teens from Punjab, India, and he lived in Brampton and worked in our factories here to help provide a life for my siblings and I. I'm really proud of that background. And having lived and been born and raised in Brampton, I saw firsthand how our city was neglected. I know that our healthcare system has not received the investments that we need. Because growing up, I would see community members waiting in the hallways for healthcare when I would go with my own family. It's not acceptable. I saw that our schools weren't being repaired and that post-secondary educational opportunities simply weren't available. And that's what inspired me to run in 2018 to be your candidate in the election. And I'm so proud of the work that I've done. And I want to thank all of our residents for giving me the opportunity to be your voice for the last 4 years. I know I've fought with passion and integrity for our local community. I helped secure funding for a cancer care center and advocated for a 3rd hospital in Brampton. But I've also been fighting to make life more affordable. I know we need to invest in building housing and we need to do things like lower auto insurance rates. And that's why I'm excited to be running again, to fight for our city and to be your voice at Queen's Park.
Yeah, and at this point, before we start into our first question, which would be healthcare. And Ramona ji, you could explain the format, but once again, I'll request all our viewers, all our listeners, and of course the readers of Midweek Newspaper and our digital platform, southasiandaily.com, to please listen to not only this discussion, but all the discussions, all the debates that we are having. And we hope that you make an informed decision, please.
Absolutely. As Sarah Singh, the NDP candidate who's here in studio, she gave her opening remarks, and now we'll go into a Q&A section where we'll ask a question and she'll have 2 minutes to answer it. And we'll go into an open discussion where all 3 of us will join in on a discussion, and I'll time it for 5 minutes and I'll let you guys know so we can get through all the important issues as there's a lot on stake for Ontario.
Healthcare, one of the big ticket items, and I'm glad that your leader mentioned in the debate, and she did refer to a woman she met in Fort Erie, and she's still working in Buffalo. As a foreign trained professional myself, I'm an engineer myself, I've been listening this the federal level from Joe Volpe and the McGuinty eras that we will be integrating the foreign trained professionals. For healthcare, what is your plan of integrating doctors and nurses here in the province?
Thank you so much for the question, Yudhavir. It's such an important one because, you know, not having people's foreign credentials recognized means that people in our communities are underemployed, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a doctor or a nurse. And that's something that the NDP understands and we're committed to addressing. We have a plan to ensure that we expedite the credentials of foreign trained nurses, to make sure that we can get them employed in our healthcare sector. Brampton has experienced for decades a healthcare crisis. This also means that we have a staffing shortage in much of our hospitals. This is a great way for us to get people that have the skills, have the knowledge, and want to get to work to be able to work in fields that they're experts in. Not doing that is really an injustice for a lot of people because it means that they aren't able to maybe provide for their families the way they want to because they're forced to, for example, work 2 to 3 jobs in order to make ends meet because their credentials weren't recognized. So that's why I'm really proud of the plan that we have. It's an important part of rebuilding our healthcare system. We need to address, the credentialing issue, but we also need to make sure that we're paying those nurses and other healthcare professionals a decent wage so that they can make a good life for their family.
All right, I wish we have more healthcare professionals because that's the need of the hour, because anytime in an emergency wait room, that's what we hear quite often, the doctors or the medical professionals are not there as much. There was music to my ears when your leader came to Brampton and announced you are committing for a 3rd hospital. Why would I believe that? The Liberals and the PCs, they haven't been able to do that. How could you do that?
Well, it's something that we committed to even in the last election, so this is not a new promise from the NDP. And I know that Andrea Horvath has visited Brampton on several occasions because she understands that we really are the epicenter for the healthcare crisis here in the province. And it's shameful that Brampton has continued to be neglected by the Liberals and Conservatives when it comes to investing in our healthcare. Both promised us a second full-fledged hospital. I was born at the old Peel Memorial, so when that was torn down and they constructed a new one, I thought we were getting something that would meet the demands of our community. It simply didn't. It was over capacity the day it opened. So since then, we've been seeing that the need has been growing. Our population is booming in Brampton, but to only have one hospital simply is an injustice. Through the pandemic, we saw much of our workforce, experience positivity rates of COVID-19, in some communities upwards of 20%. Can you imagine trying to manage a pandemic with just one hospital? It just wasn't fair. And so many of our community members had to be shipped out to other parts of the province in order to get the health care they deserved. That's not something that should be a reality here in Ontario. Communities like Hamilton or Mississauga, they have multiple hospitals. And it's upsetting sometimes to think about how we've been neglected in Brampton. And so that's why I'm really proud of the Ontario NDP's commitment to building another hospital in Brampton. But not only that, we're committed to expanding healthcare services across the board. We know that we need another hospital, but as we discussed earlier, we need to make sure we have the staff in those hospitals, the human resources, to really make sure that when someone goes to the hospital, they are getting the care they need in a timely manner. That's something we hear from community members time and time again. They go to our hospital and they wait because there simply aren't enough staff. So if we really want to solve the healthcare crisis, we not only need to build a 3rd hospital for Brampton, we need to do things like repeal Bill 124 and hire and train staff in our local communities to be retained in our local communities as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point that we certainly need 3 hospitals because Hamilton, as your leader was mentioning there, I heard her and we've heard this many times, that yes, for similar population, you have multiple hospitals in Hamilton and as you mentioning in Mississauga as well, but here we are in Brampton. I wish the Liberal candidate and the PC candidate were here to defend their records because in this century, those are the 2 parties which have ruled Ontario up until now. And at this point, talking further about healthcare and other issues, Rumunaji.
Absolutely. Mental health is quite important.
Absolutely.
And awareness for it is, I think, crucial. Young people aged 15 to 24 are more likely to experience mental illness or substance use disorder. 39% of Ontario high school students indicate a moderate to serious level of psychological distress, such as symptoms of anxiety and depression. There are about 28,000 children and youth on waiting lists for mental health treatment in Ontario since 2020. How is your party going to address mental health, and how does it differ from other party platforms?
Thank you so much for the question, Ramona. It's actually one that really hits home. Before I got into politics, I was working with a lot of young people, and they would share with me that they were experiencing mental health, but there simply weren't the services available in our local community. As you point out, the wait lists have grown, and those investments simply haven't flown. The pandemic has made things so much harder for young people and families across this province, and especially in my community of Brampton. I do hear that from families that they know that the services simply aren't there, and they're worried because when their child is experiencing crisis, a mental health crisis, they are ending up in the one and only hospital that we have, often being sent home without actually getting the treatment or supports that they need. So it's devastating for a lot of families to realize that, that's the reality in our communities right now. Something that compounded the problem was the fact that students were kept out of the classrooms for the last 2 years because the government didn't want to invest in things like, smaller class sizes to help keep our students safe. So those had residual impacts to their mental health, and as you point out, huge increases in demand for mental health supports. Hospitals saw over 100% increase in demand for mental health supports in their emergency rooms. So for us, we understand how broken the mental health care system is, and that's why the Ontario NDP, I'm actually really proud of our mental health plan to help provide supports, not only invest in the system, but make sure that it's accessible. A lot of families say that they are accessing private mental health services. We don't believe it should be a matter of who can afford to pay for those mental health services. They should be available to all Ontarians, especially our young people right now in crisis. And so that's why we're investing over $1 billion in mental health care supports, because we understand right now we need to fix what's broken and make sure that those mental health supports are there, not only for young people, but our seniors as well, who are dealing with the impacts of isolation. So when we talk about healthcare, it's about understanding all the different components that need to be invested in things like mental health. We can actually save money down the road if we're actually providing people with the right supports they need. They don't end up in crisis. They don't end up in our hospitals seeking services that they could have got in the community had we just made the right investments.
Absolutely, and Andrew Horvath, the leader of NDP, is talking about universal mental health, universal dental care. Can you explain about some of those policies?
Absolutely. I mean, universal mental health, dental care, pharmacare, these are things that New Democrats believe in. We understand there are elements of our healthcare system that create universal access for people. That means funding those services so that they're available, making sure people don't have to pay out of pocket for things like mental health services, a psychologist, a therapist, what have you. Or if you need to go to the dentist, for example, we know so many Ontarians are forgoing dental care because they simply cannot afford it. This means that they may need something as simple as a root canal, for example. They don't get that done because it costs too much. They end up, again, in the hospital with far worse health implications that then cost the system a significant amount. So we believe that if we invest in programs like dental care and provide universal access, we can make sure that Ontarians get the health care they need, but we're also making smart and prudent investments that help us save money down the road.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to the open discussion format. This is a format where we can ask questions and all three of us will participate, and it's a 5-minute segment because there's so much to get through.
Sure. And I think our first topic for the open discussion is infrastructure. Infrastructure will certainly talk, it does cover so many different areas. Healthcare we already talked. We'll talk about education a little bit later on. But why don't we start with the highways and the transit system? I think this has precisely become one of the referendum issues in this elections. So Sarah, my question to you would be, why is NDP opposing this highways? The PCs are saying they have a $25 billion committed in their budget for highways.
You know, the Highway 413, that's the project that you're referring to. You know, studies have shown very clearly that it will have very negative environmental impacts. It will damage our local waterways, for example, the green belt, but also the billions of dollars that will be spent on this project and the impacts that it will have don't actually help, the outcome won't actually help us save time on the highways. Studies are showing that it won't save less than 30 seconds. So when we think of a project like that, that simply is just going to ram through, you know, much of our protected farmlands and greenbelt, it doesn't actually help our community. And that's why we're proposing to do things differently. And you know, it's not just the NDP that proposes this. Local councils also oppose it. Community members oppose it because they simply don't want this project. We think of billions of dollars of cost that could have been invested somewhere else. You know, what I hear from community members is they don't want to spend billions on a highway when we have only one hospital in our community. They want to see better investments, and that's why we oppose the project as well, because we think it's maybe not worth the investment that the government thinks it is. But on the flip side, we also do need to find real solutions for people in Brampton and the Peel region. I can appreciate that traffic and congestion is a real issue. I grew up in our community, so I've seen that growth over the years. And those roadways do need to be constructed in a way that accommodate for things like transit infrastructure. So improving the LRT, for example, looking at a BRT option down Queen. These are infrastructure projects that will help us get people moving more effectively without just building another highway. We still need to get things like two-way all-day go, you know, a commitment from the Liberals, a commitment from the Conservatives. We still haven't seen that delivered on. Investments in services like that in our transit will help create that infrastructure, but also get people using it more effectively. It's underutilized because people can't access it, right? And that's a huge problem. Another piece of this, and we understand this, and you know, I was at the Board of Trade this morning, and they highlighted the need for this as well, is we know that we are a transportation and logistics hub here in Brampton and the region. We have an intermodal here in Brampton. So we need to look at other ways to get some of those goods moving across the province. So investing in things like our rail and building that infrastructure also allows us to get those trucks off the road, those goods off the road, so we free up space and we use some of this underutilized infrastructure that surrounds our community of Brampton as well.
All right.
Yeah, the Liberals are talking about a buck a day, buck a ride, province-wide, and that's something that's very new, but it is a short-term plan, which is only budgeted for this year and next year. How would the NDP combat unaffordability when it comes to transit and get more people to use transit as opposed to driving?
Absolutely. So we're definitely looking at fare integration models to make sure that it's a little bit more seamless and affordable. But it's also important to understand that, you know, municipalities will be deferring some of those revenues that they collect from transit as well with what the Liberals have proposed. So our plan is to work with those municipalities to ensure that they're not losing revenue that they need, but to integrate the system more effectively. And at the end of the day, as we've seen in many other countries, you know, when you build a transit system that people can access, when it's cost effective, people will use that. And I think that's a big part of the problem here, is that people can't use the transit and it hasn't been invested in and built up to meet the demands of the local community. So we understand that, and that's why we're committed to, you know, making it more affordable and making it more accessible for people.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to our favorite topic, which is Brampton. And actually, I'll start with you. You know, Brampton hasn't received its fair share. This is something we've talked about on multiple occasions, numerous elections, whether it's federal or provincial or municipal. What are some of the things you'd like to see for Brampton? What are some priorities that you'd like the provincial parties to listen to and to do for Brampton?
I think the answer would be, what is it that I won't like to see in Brampton? What have we got? I mean, even at the cost of sounding repetitive, I would say this. I wish the PC candidate and the Liberal candidate were here. I had many questions for them, because these are the two parties who have been in power for almost 2 decades now, and or even more actually. But I haven't seen anything for Brampton. You let me know. Do we have LRT in Brampton? No. Do we have a university in Brampton? No. Do we have 3 hospitals in Brampton? No. Auto insurance, skyrocketing. Affordability, as much as crime wasn't talked much about in these provincial elections, crime is another issue. Did we have to get, you know, a celebrity Maple Leaf star, his car being hijacked to really blow up this issue? And I'll let Sarah Singh answer this, that what is your plan for Brampton? One thing is for sure, as much as, again, I'm saying this, I wish the candidates were here to defend their record, but they didn't show up. But let's see what the NDP has to offer for Brampton.
No, thank you so much, Advir. I think you highlighted all of the things that we are definitely fighting for, and we've championed over not only the last 4 years, but I know our leader has been a champion of those issues even prior to the last election. And so, we're going to keep fighting to make sure we get 3 hospitals in Brampton because we deserve no less. I'm going to keep fighting to make sure we get a standalone cancer care center, something I was really proud of to table a motion that was supported. So that's a huge priority for me. Investing in things like our mental health care. Repairing our schools is a huge priority for our local community. I hear from parents all the time, they're very worried that the schools are not a safe learning environment. Ceiling tiles falling down, drips and leaks and things that just haven't been repaired. And so they're very worried and they want to see that addressed. So that's a huge priority for me at a provincial level, fixing the repair backlog. It's also things like lowering auto insurance rates, and that's why the NDP, I'm so proud of our plan to not only reduce rates by up to 40%, but also study models that we can implement here in Ontario to make it fair for people across this province, but especially the people of Brampton and Brampton Centre who've had to face postal code discrimination. But also making key investments in things like our transit. I think it's so important that we do have things like two-way all-day go and that we get a university here in the city. It was disappointing that the Conservatives, that was one of the first things they did when they took office in 2018, canceled this wonderful university project that would have brought good jobs to our local community, helped spur development, create things like housing, all of that around this project, all taken away because the government didn't feel that Brampton was worth the investments. And so I'm definitely committed to making sure that we do get a university, especially coming from an academic background. I really fought hard to make sure that what was at that time Ryerson University would have a campus here because I saw how they transformed local urban centers into something very beneficial for the community. So it's things like that that really inspire my fight, inspire the party's fight as well, and things that I'm committed to delivering for to the people of Brampton.
Yeah, Ramona ji.
Absolutely. I think also we want to be able to attract corporations and jobs to come to Brampton so people can, the dream for any municipality is to live, work and play in your city, not just have a bedroom community where you just sleep there and then you have to travel far to be able to go to work and to go out and do things. So I think that's another vision. And I believe that being so close to the airport, I think Canada's largest airport, which is Pearson Airport, it's a hub that connects internationally to so many different destinations, that Brampton just being, a short distance away, we need to have your 5-star hotels and your convention centers to attract businesses and conventions here for trade, commerce, all of that would be a great vision for Brampton.
I definitely agree, and I think you summed that up so well. People want to have communities that they can live, work, and play in, and we need to make the right investments to be able to attract corporations from around the world, but people from around the world to want to stay here. I know housing is such a big concern in terms of people making those investments because they don't feel like their employees may have a affordable place to live, and that maybe we're lacking some of the amenities people might be looking for. So I think, coming from this perspective of having been born and raised in Brampton, I know that we have so much potential to develop into a global city. We just need governments and, the right representatives to fight for the things we need in our community and make the right investments so that we can grow and be that global city that I know we are.
One quick point, if you allow me, I wanted to make here. I've lived all my life either in Brampton or in India. So since immigrating to Canada, this is my city, and here we talk about this is the time when we spur up new ideas, new thought process should spring up. This is the time. But as much as we're seeing a deficit as far as infrastructure deficit is concerned, Brampton has infrastructure deficit almost of everything in education, healthcare, everything. I wish, we could have made things the other way. We should have had some ideas. Where does Brampton lead? Can we make it a sports hub? Can we make it a technology hub? You were saying it so right the other day that yes, we are so close to airport.
Absolutely.
Can we make it an international destination for cricket? Many countries are looking for that, but once again, that is exactly being represented here, where we have a deficit and we are looking for great ideas. We're looking for more discussions, but here we have a deficit in terms of candidates as well from the PCs and the Liberals. I'll hammer it again and again. Please, our next topic, I think, is affordability.
Yes, and that's yours.
Okay, affordability, that's what surveys after surveys have told us that yes, affordability has become the #1 priority, the #1 issue. It has even surpassed COVID now. People are seeing the back of COVID, though it hasn't been really over as yet. As far as affordability is concerned, what is the NDP's plan to tackle it?
Well, when we think about affordability, this is impacting everyday lives, as you were saying. It's everything from the cost of housing, the cost of our food, and the auto insurance premiums that people are forced to pay here in our community. So for us, we do have a plan to help with some of those affordability issues by doing things like starting to reduce auto insurance premiums for drivers, not only in Brampton, but across the province. But it's also about, things like making sure housing is more affordable. Measures like rent control, for example, can help with the affordability issue. I speak to many people in our community, whether they're on a fixed income or not, they're finding it harder and harder to make ends meet and pay for basic necessities like a roof over their head. Rents are increasing, and so many are concerned that they may lose their housing. So I think that when we think of the overall cost of everything going up with inflation, something like rent control can at least provide some predictability and stability to those who are accessing the rental market. I think also when we think of things like hydro, this is a huge concern. Liberals sold off Hydro One, Crown Jewel, and people have seen their rates skyrocket since then. Conservatives in 2018 promised they were going to do something to lower hydro rates. Unfortunately, I think for most, even throughout the pandemic, they saw those rates go up. And so that's why we need to, address those concerns and regulate some of those rates, but help make life more affordable, something that we haven't seen this government really do.
Yeah, and if you could touch a little bit more on the housing, because as far as affordability, there are other issues are important, but housing or shelter cost, that's a major crisis now.
Absolutely, and it's been a crisis that's been brewing for quite some time. We do see that there is a lack of supply in the market, something that was created under the Liberals. Some of the lowest levels of housing were constructed under their leadership, and under Doug Ford's Conservatives, we've only seen the prices skyrocket for housing. It's unaffordable. I speak to young people, millennials. A dream of owning a home is becoming a very distant reality and very impossible. People are losing hope. But as I said too, being able to save for a down payment, if you're a renter with rents going up, it's getting harder and harder to save. So our plan is a combination of not only building 1.5 million homes, but also addressing this, by making sure we have the Homes in Ontario plan, for example, that helps with the down payment for the first-time home buyers to be able to access the market. So we need to spur development. We definitely need to build housing, but we need to build the right type of housing as well. There's a missing middle, for example, in the housing market where, middle income earners and middle priced housing is definitely missing. So it's also about working with municipalities to create diversity in that supply, looking at multiplexes, for example, and better utilizing some of the land so we have more density in some spaces. These are solutions that we should be looking at and we need to look at if we're actually going to solve some of the housing crisis here in the province of Ontario.
Ramanaji, we have approximately 1.5 minutes. Briefly in that time, would you want to say anything that you understood from the debates or even otherwise and as an associate editor for affordability and housing?
Absolutely. I think now that with the highest inflation rates in decades, I think also wages need to be able to match cost of living. Even without inflation, things have become more expensive, and we've seen people who are on minimum wage have been fixed at that price for a long time. So it's been a conversation I've heard from all the different leaders talking about increasing the minimum wage. And I think the NDP has the most aggressive plan to be able to go to $20 an hour, $1 every year, starting from $16 this year. So I think that needs to be of a discussion so people are able to. What good is rent control if you can't afford to have a proper wage for the work that you do for people who are on minimum wage? So I think that's also important. And of course, when it comes to what was, I think, really important was the Ontario Disability Support Program when it comes to social assistance. And I read on Twitter, it was, somebody said, if CERB payments were about $2,000 a month, how do you expect somebody on Ontario Disability Support Program to live with $1,100 and then the increase would just take it up to $1,400? Do you have any sort of insight on that issue? that you'd like to share with us?
Absolutely. You know, we hear from people with disabilities all the time that they are, you know, living below the poverty line and have been forced. It's legislated poverty, as we say, because as you very clearly point out, you know, CERB was $2,000, and for many, you know, the cost of living in Brampton is approximately $1,800 on average for a rental unit. How can people with disabilities live with dignity with such low rates? And then it also has impacts to other elements of their life. If they aren't able to have a safe place to call home, there are other social determinants of health that are impacted as a result of that. So that's why we've committed to increasing the rates to help those who are living on social assistance to live a better life above the poverty line so that they can live with dignity as well as they deserve to. But I just want to pick up on the point around the minimum wage and, you know, the affordability issue. It's such an important one. You know, when we think of the cost of housing, for example, you know, I know that the Region of Peel has a housing master plan, and in that they actually point out that even in the region, it would take a minimum wage household, 2 individuals working on minimum wage, for them to be able to save for a down payment for a house in our community 51 years. It's just not realistic to assume that people can then afford to have a home or a safe place to call home either, right, if you're in this predicament. So it's about increasing the minimum wage to ensure that people can access the good things in life. And that's why I am actually really proud of our plan, which helps us get to a $20 minimum wage by 2026 in a stable and predictable way. I think that's a very important part of this conversation. You know, we are laying this out so, you know, we can work with the business community, work with the sector to ensure that they are able to withstand the increases as well. But they know that it's coming. Unlike what the Conservatives and Liberals did, you know, just overnight hiking the minimum wage, that had really serious impacts to our business community, and that's something that we understand. I hear from a lot of businesses that they also understand life is getting harder, and so they want to pay their workers fairly, and they want to make sure they're taken care of. Because if your workers are doing well and treated fairly, you know, it's easier to retain them, and you know that they're going to be more productive. So a lot of businesses understand the importance of increasing the minimum wage, and they're here to work with a government that will help deliver that in a fair and, again, stable and predictable way.
If I may just make a point, you actually believe that. You've always talked about how it's so important to ensure that people that you work with have, you know, their security met so they can actually be happy and do a good productive. Can you share a little bit on that? Because I think it's an amazing philosophy that you have.
Yeah, sure. I think there was a time when people used to call, and they still do, as employees, and then the word team came up, and I think I consider, at least, and this is my philosophy too, that I consider this as family. And I think when you make sure that everybody is working like a family, the productivity is way high up there, and you basically involve them, integrate them in all the decision-making process that is done. And I think it has worked really well here at Y Media, and I think they are taking the charge. And here it is in debates as well. We give the charge to Ramona ji. You've led it from the front. Thank you so much. And at this point, I'll quickly take this opportunity to thank the entire team of Y Media. They do an amazing job. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now moving on to an issue that I think is so important, near dear to me, are seniors. Senior citizens are the most vulnerable in our society. They may experience economic insecurity, inadequate and affordable housing, food insecurity, and barriers in areas of healthcare and social services. What will your party do to address some of these needs that senior citizens are facing?
Thank you so much for raising the issues of seniors. You know, as the party's critic for long-term care, home care, and seniors care, over the last number of years, I've been able to connect and really understand some of those issues, and I'm proud of the work that we're doing to help fix what's broken. You know, I was raised by my grandparents as well, so I understand the importance of things like investing in home care so that our elders can stay with us. And that's something that the NDP understands is very important in terms of our philosophy. It isn't about just creating large-scale institutions for our seniors. It's actually about keeping them at home, helping them age in place, and building, you know, villages where they can also, you know, end their lives in dignity as well in that final chapter. But what I'm hearing from a lot of seniors who are actually on fixed incomes, the cost of living is rising rapidly. Many are afraid they may lose their housing, or they're making very tough decisions between paying the mortgage or rent and buying groceries, for example, or paying the hydro bill. And I don't think seniors in their golden years, have contributed so much to our local economy here, should have to be worried about how they're going to pay those bills because they're on fixed incomes. So that's why we're committed to doing things like lowering the cost of living for not only seniors but Ontarians across the board, and making sure that there is some predictability with things like rent control for seniors. Many of them have sold their home and are renting now in order to just have a smaller place, for example. They do worry that they may lose that housing. When I hear from seniors, many of them do share that they want to be treated with respect and valued members of their communities. And I think what we've seen is a lack of that here. There's a philosophy that feels like elders lose value in our communities. We don't believe that. We believe that they are still contributing. And so making sure we're also investing in supports for seniors to access community programming is also very important. It's a social fabric that they're involved in and a way for them to give back to their local communities too. So I think there's so much that we can do, but I think what we saw throughout the pandemic is that our long-term care system is absolutely broken. And I think for a lot of seniors, they're very worried that if the right supports aren't there through things like home care or a caregiver benefit, they may be forced into long-term care that may not even be culturally appropriate for them. So, for me, it's not just about what supports that they need, it's about how do we create a system that we can age into with pride and dignity, and I think that's what seniors want as well.
If I may ask, NDP leader Andrew Horwath talked about making sure that seniors who cannot afford to pay their property tax, it's something that the province would cover for them, the government, if elected an NDP government, and then that's something that they can repay when they sell their home. So what's the situation where if they were to pass away in their home, how does that work out in terms of paying back the province?
So my understanding of the program is that those that would be inheriting the home would have the ability to, through the sale of the home, pay back what is that deferred amount. And I think that, it does help out the families still because they're able to, make sure that their loved ones can put some money back into their pocket, but that they aren't sort of bearing the brunt of that burden as well. And I think it's an important program, just like our Homes in Ontario program, that really does help make sure people can get access to a home and stay in their homes longer. It's something that I'm really proud of, and I think, as Andrea said, an innovative way to help defer some of those taxes for seniors and help them feel more comfortable and stay in their homes longer.
Thank you so much. And at this point, why don't we talk about environment? That's another very important issue I see, and as much as we are facing, we heard that in the debate as well. One of the striking features that I heard in the debate and many other debates as well, not just the Ontario Leaders debate, we've seen reports after reports regarding environment. We have reached a point where I don't think so we can take things back in time. So what's the NDP's plan as far as environment is concerned?
No, thank you for that very important point. And I think it's something that more and more people are understanding. Climate change is real. We are seeing the impacts of this in our local communities. Even, for example, in Brampton, we're seeing some historic flooding in communities like the Churchville area near the Credit River. So we do need to take these impacts seriously, and we need to be investing in being able to get to a net zero here in the province. And I'm really proud of the plan that we have because it does involve doing things like investing in our auto sector and making sure that we have electric vehicles that are being manufactured and bought right here in Ontario. But we also need to be doing things like investing in innovation hubs. I think this is what's going to help create those jobs of the future when it comes to the green economy. But what we've seen from this Conservative government is actually not taking climate change seriously. Their plan included putting stickers, for example, on gas pumps. That's money that did not need to be spent, that could have been returned to the taxpayers of our province, or could have been put towards green initiatives. Energy retrofitting initiatives canceled. These are contracts that were canceled. these are jobs, you know, hundreds of thousands of jobs that can be created if we are to renovate and retrofit buildings, for example. So these elements are all included in our Green New Democratic Deal, which does take seriously the climate crisis, but also has a plan to help us transition, create new jobs in the green economy, and help us be prepared to also mitigate some of the impacts of climate change as well.
I think that's very critical on when it comes to environment. We've seen that as a massive issue when it comes to federal and provincial elections of late. And when it comes to green belt protection and the blue belt, that's also critical. Can you explain to us what the strategy there is as well to make sure that's maintained, and also increase housing and infrastructure, which is something that the PCs say they want to do more of?
Absolutely. You know, one of my first jobs actually was a camp counselor here in the city of Brampton. And so I used to take young people on like river walks and hikes through some of our nature areas in El Dorado Park. And so, you know, I really do understand the importance of protecting our waterways. And that's why, you know, I know that the Ontario NDP is committed to not only protecting the green belt and the blue belts, but making sure that, you know, we're not just going forward with large-scale development that does encroach on those areas. You know, once we pave over elements of the greenbelt, that's land we will never get back. And it does have a serious consequence on our local environment, but also our health and well-being as a local population. And so, you know, I think we need to be looking at ways to protect our local environments, protect the wildlife, protect the nature that is there. We're also very dependent on all of that as well. But we can still spur development in a safe way around those areas. I think that's why environmental impact assessments are so important, so that we fully understand what those impacts look like. So it's tools like that that we also want to see being utilized effectively if we are planning development, not just ignoring them and ripping them up because they don't serve the purpose of the government of the day. And so those are things that I believe we will continue to move forward with while finding a balance, because we absolutely do need to find a balance, but we can't do it at the expense of our local environment, because once it's gone, it definitely won't be back.
Two quick points on the environmental issue, and both of you could have one minute each. And you know, these are just mere observations. You know, I'm just throwing the discussion since it's an open forum discussion. One of the point is that yes, when I go and you know, travel in few cities or in few areas in Toronto as well, there are lots of more of a green space that we see missing because of the urban sprawl. That's one point. Second is that as much as we are encouraging electric vehicles, still the confidence isn't there. Are we really creating an infrastructure? Because I know the readily available gas stations, so there are many people who are still very comfortable with the gas guzzlers. But are we really able to build that infrastructure around those electric vehicles as they come along? These are the two observations. You can start for a minute and then you take a minute too. Thank you.
No, absolutely, and I think it goes back to Ramona's point around protecting some of those, you know, lands in our green belt, but also our parks. You know, I'm really proud in Brampton. You know, we do have a number of parks like Heart Lake Conservation, Chinguacousy Park, for example, where you can go and appreciate being outdoors and connecting with nature. But if we were to get rid of that, I mean, again, the urban sprawl issue, it impacts our quality of life. Yeah. And so, you know, I think we need to find ways to create balanced development, and that comes with planning at a local level. So empowering the local municipalities to do things like protect some of those parks and have them be also created intentionally for the local community. I think, you know, as you were mentioning, the electric vehicle, you know, sort of incentive for people to purchase, I think more now than ever, especially with rising gas prices, people are looking to make a switch here. But, you know, we need to make sure that we're incentivizing people so that it is affordable for them to purchase an electric vehicle. Again, if we want to build a thriving electric vehicle sector here, we need to make sure people can actually afford those vehicles. And so, you know, it was really disappointing when in 2018, the incentives and the rebate was canceled by the Ford government, a tool that could help us, you know, make it more affordable for drivers to purchase their first electric vehicle taken away from them. So that's something that we're committed to reinstating so that we can help make sure that, you know, people are saving money and that they are able to purchase a more environmentally friendly option when they want to get onto the roadways.
I'm just trying to make the optimum use of two intelligent brains around me, And do you think we're spurring up this sort of innovation? Since you mentioned the electric vehicles, we don't have any of our cars. US has almost all the European countries. India made a car, Nano. It was cost effective and it's running great. We've never had a Canadian car. BlackBerry was the last big thing that we had. Are we really spurring the economic activity and the innovation and the tech hub here?
I think it's an excellent question and something that I know a lot of young people are asking. Are we spurring the level of development and innovation that we're looking for here in the province in many different sectors? And I think the automotive industry is a great example. I mean, we were and are an economic engine when it comes to manufacturing vehicles. But if we're not making the right investments, then it sort of de-incentivizes the innovation that we need to see. So I'm hopeful that with the right investments, with the right incentives, we can spur that, and we can be a leader in producing electric vehicles here in the province of Ontario, but across Canada. And I think that's something that we need to be doing. And I think what we're seeing is a bit of a shift happening, but I do believe we could have done this a lot sooner. We would have been much further down the path towards getting to net zero and really encouraging people to purchase an electric vehicle. But if you have governments who don't believe in the climate crisis, if you have governments that are going to rip up charging stations, if you are going to have them cancel rebates that help people purchase their vehicles, then of course you're not going to see the climate and the sort of environment that we need to create the innovation and spur that development here locally.
Ramona, you quickly want to add on to that, and then the final question today. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I wanted to get an electric vehicle back in 2017, and I went to the dealership, my choice, and they said, well, it's important that I have a 4-wheel drive. They said, no, well, the batteries are so big that the ones that we have are rear-wheel drive, and I said, well, that's not going to be great because for winter months, I don't feel comfortable. So then I said, okay, I'll wait. I bought a gas guzzler, and then this year I was like, okay, I want an electric vehicle again, and so I went and took a look again to see what's in the market, and I could see either like really high-end electric vehicle or like not so, and then there wasn't a middle ground. And there's also the fact that I'm like, am I really going to spend so much on a very high-end electric vehicle when I can have other aspects of it if I don't purchase one? Also the charging stations, like I feel a bit insecure. Yeah. How far can I go before I need one? So yes, you're right, infrastructure is important for that. I lived in Europe for many years, and something I saw in Netherlands was literally everywhere you went, there was a pedestrian walkway, there was a cyclist walkway, there was tram for you to take, and then there was cars, and all these 4 lanes were together. And it just worked. Mind you, their climate is not as severe as ours during winter months, but they do have winter as well. But you saw your pedestrians, cyclists, the train, like the LRT, I guess, and then vehicles. And then when I lived in London, England, I used public transportation for 8 years without needing a vehicle. I walked more. It was better for me. I loved green space. And then I think being back here in Canada, it was just, I'm back and driving everywhere and not getting as much exercise. So I definitely want to be somebody who wants to get an electric vehicle, but I think it's the plan about having charging stations and having that infrastructure in place to feel secure.
Absolutely. And I want to pick up on that because I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier. If you build the infrastructure, people will use it. So as you point out in the Netherlands, the design and the planning, people are able to use all these different modes of transportation. And I think that we need that foresight and planning here in our local communities, but we need to give municipalities the tool to actually create that infrastructure because I think there's so many people, I'm even just thinking of our seniors, thinking of how they use their bicycles to get around in the summer months, but the roadways just don't accommodate for that. So I think if we build the right infrastructure for our communities, we create these connecting transit points, people will, not only want to make those choices, but they will look for them in their communities. Charging stations should be available to people downtown Brampton. Our transit fleet is, Brampton Zoom is trying to be electrified, but if they don't have the charging stations to be able to do that because they didn't get the provincial funding, then they're going to have to look at continuing to use, the alternative option. When they're trying to do the right thing and reduce their emissions in the fleet, we need to make those investments to make sure that those charging stations and the rest of the infrastructure for like active transportation are also there. That's how we're going to really, I think, make the dents we need to in addressing the climate issue, but also getting to net zero in a effective and sustainable way.
Wish we had more time. Very interesting discussion going on, but I think we're already short of time. And our last topic for the day is education.
Yes, education is a big platform item I find in this election, especially with the Liberals and the NDP. The similarities there are that both the Liberals and the NDP want to be able to clear the backlogs of repairs for the schools, to be able to invest in that and bring them up to code, as well as reducing classroom sizes. Both Liberals and NDP want to do that. They want to hire more teachers. So if you can tell us, what is the NDP plan? How is it different than the Liberal plan? And of course, the PC plan as well when it comes to education.
Of course, and I do wish that my colleagues were here to have this really important discussion, because much of what we're seeing in the schools, the repair backlog, for example, was created by the Liberals. In 2018, that repair backlog was well above $15 billion. And because the Ford government did not make the investments necessary and did things like, didn't use the gas tax money to repair our schools, that meant that repair backlog grew to nearly almost $17 billion. So as I was mentioning earlier, parents are concerned, students are concerned, youth council members of our Brampton Centre Youth Council would send me pictures of what's happening in their schools. And it's a really unsafe learning environment, not only for those students, but also for the educators. If there's a garbage can, for example, catching drips from the ceiling in a hallway, this is what's happening in schools in Ontario because of the mess that the Liberals created. And so that's why we're committed to fixing the repair backlog over the next 10 years and making the investments that we need to make sure that students have a safe learning environment and it's a safe workplace as well. But it's not only fixing the repair backlog. As you noticed and pointed out, class sizes are ballooning here in the province of Ontario. Cuts have meant that classes are growing, sometimes 30 plus students in a classroom. It's, again, not a productive learning environment when students are crammed together and educators aren't able to give students the one-on-one time that they know they want to and that students deserve. And so that's why, even throughout the pandemic, we advocated to the government that they needed to cap class sizes and create smaller classrooms throughout Ontario because we knew that this was a problem. And with the pandemic, it was a public health issue when you have that many students crammed into a classroom, and not capping class sizes also meant that students' health and safety was being put at risk along with our educators. So when it comes to our education, it's about making the right investments, and I think it's about priorities here in the province of Ontario. And that's why I know that the Ontario NDP, we have a fantastic education critic, Marit Stiles. She really did a great job of holding this government to account, but we know that they're not going to fix what's broken. Conservatives are going to continue to cut and want to privatize our public education system, which will result in less teachers in the classroom, as we've already seen, and a lower quality of education for our students. So we need to make the right investments. It's also, education is a fundamental part to economic growth. If we aren't able to properly educate our students and give them the right opportunities, it will have impacts to future workforce sort of outcomes in our communities as well, because we aren't being able to help students become the best people they'd like to be because those services and supports aren't there. So I really feel like that's an important connection that we need to make with the investments that need to happen now, is if we're thinking of future projections and the economy that we want to see. We talked about innovation and spurring innovation. We need to make sure that we have an educated population to be able to achieve those outcomes in the future as well.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that. Actually, that's music to my ears. And pardon my ignorance on this one, because I didn't do my bachelor's or master's here in Canada, and I'm sure both of you have done that. So the question that I'm throwing here is, what about free university education? Because I'm just alluding to the point that we have many countries in Europe, especially the Scandinavian countries, who have free university education. Second point being that you just made, I really like that point when you just said that, that if you have better educated citizens, they're going to certainly spur the economic growth. They're going to pay more taxes. You can have better, innovators out of that, scientists, doctors, engineers. And we don't want to have a two-tier system. One student, as much, and I said, listen this on the radio show, on my talk shows as well. Here's one student, as much as a student wanted to study, but maybe you want to have to take OSAP or go through all that process, and why bother having their loans as well? And here's a student the parents could afford, okay, fine, nothing wrong with that student. So I think this to me looks like a two-tier system, which we had back in India. For you, this question, and also for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to accessing post-secondary education, we know that there are many barriers, as you point out, Yudhvir, for students who want to access that education. And so that's why the Ontario NDP, we have been fighting to make sure that we do things like make grants available instead of loans. Some students, and I know I certainly did going through graduate studies, just amass a tremendous amount of debt seeking out higher education. Sometimes as much as cost of a house for some people, depending on the career you're choosing. So we believe that we can make things more accessible through things like grants that don't have to be paid back. I know there are conversations around looking at the interest rate on OSAP loans. I mean, I think it's kind of shocking that students are being charged on a daily basis interest on their loans, often when they're underemployed and not able to actually make repayments on those loans as well. So we definitely need to look at ways to make education and more accessible and remove some of the barriers to accessing post-secondary education, and it starts with things like looking at how to reduce tuition costs for students. I think we also need to, of course, like I said earlier, make sure we're investing in our elementary and secondary levels of education as well, and not creating a two-tier system there either, because creeping privatization in our public education system has meant that a lot of families who maybe do have the means are opting to send their children to private school. It shouldn't have to be that way here. Something that we all value, I think, are our public services. Making sure that we have public education at all levels, I think, should be a priority of any government. Again, it goes back to creating the highly educated population that we want here to make sure that we do develop into the economy and country that we want to be.
Yeah, lesser post-secondary education university certification could be a massive stumbling block in your lives, and even if you have OSAP and you're done, a massive loan could be another, I think you could be postponing very important decisions like marriage or having kids. Ramonaji, your take?
I think that it's a fantastic idea to be able to have a post-secondary education that is funded for by the government, but I'd only do that if we overhaul the education system and follow the model in Germany where they actually streamline students. They start testing them from grade 7 and 8 to be able to streamline them for high school to either go into trades or to professions, and then graduate them to jobs when it comes to whether they study in colleges or universities. And that way it's not gender specific roles or what you feel like. It's really based on your aptitude and your skill level, and then capped classroom sizes would target that to make sure these students are not only like working on the skill set that they already have and fine tuning it, but then you have a great workforce as well. Because if you, I think that right now our education system needs to have education that you graduate to jobs that are available. Like, what good is it if I go and take film studies, for example? And there's nothing wrong with that, it's fabulous, but if it's my only education, I graduate from it, what are my projections for like jobs here in Ontario? Well, maybe yes, there was a big market when it came to filming here. There is the subsidization that goes with that, but there are other curriculums where there's not a lot of jobs, and we need to be able to match that. And I think that one way to do that is having the free education for post-secondary, but you need to streamline it all, so it's not just, hey, I'm going to go do this, and then now what?
Well, thank you so much for the great discussion. And Saraji, I'd like to thank you for your time. We wish you all the best. It was thoroughly entertaining. I really enjoyed listening to both the comments. Thank you so much. And I think, Ramona, you have the final question.
That we've summed up with all the questions. Are there anything that you'd like to address the audience who's listening to us?
I just want to say thank you both so much. This was definitely an enlightening and fun conversation, so thank you for the questions. And again, I wish that we could have had a more fulsome debate on what each party was going to offer here in the election for Brampton Centre. But I'm glad that we could have this conversation today. And I just want to remind viewers at home that as your Ontario NDP candidate here seeking re-election, I'm definitely excited and looking forward to getting back to work at Queen's Park and being a voice for our local community in the riding of Brampton Centre, a community that I was born and raised in. And I know that I have a strong record of fighting for our city with passion and integrity. And so I hope that I can count on your support again on June 2nd to continue that fight. I know we have so much more work to do. And to anyone watching that wants to get involved with our local campaign, you're always welcome to come by our community office at Kennedy Road South. That's 50 Kennedy Road South here in Brampton. We're always looking for volunteers, and we're very excited to win again on June 2nd. And thanks everyone again for the opportunity to discuss some of these very important issues.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us at Y Media's debate in the 2022 provincial election, as we are doing debates in all the ridings and bringing all the key messages to you to let you know who your local candidates are. As whoever becomes premier, it is your local candidate that becomes an MPP is your first point of contact to be able to go to them and have access to them about your issues and concerns and have them help you through it. It is an expensive vote because it is a 4-year commitment to a government, and as you've seen so many changes since 2018, the last election, to 2022, I know my world is different and the issues that concern me are much more different than 4 years ago. This is the reason why Y Media is doing a full coverage 7 days a week on Y Media Political Sensex and our morning show, as well as Yudhvir Jaswal's primetime show and our evening live show. So we're doing about 12 hours of live coverage on election and issues that matter.
Sure, and precisely the reason for that is as much as we can all talk about it on our dining tables, we can talk in the media, but the power to execute, there's only one person who has the power to execute, and that is an elected representative. So make sure you listen to all the discussions, all the debates, and please make an informed decision. Thank you so much, Sharaji. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all the time that we have for tonight.